The last thing my father said before I walked out of my parents' house was, "You'll be begging on the street." I was 19. I had 2 duffel bags, less than $100 in my checking account, and nowhere to go. My father stood in the doorway with his arms folded while my mother watched behind him. Neither looked worried. They looked certain. Certain I would come crawling back. Certain I would realize I needed them. Certain that saying no to them had been the biggest mistake of my life. 15 years later, I would remember that sentence. While standing inside the 14th restaurant I had built from the ground up. Not because I wanted revenge. Because by then, my parents were sitting across from my attorney, demanding 30% of everything I owned. And they had brought a document they claimed proved they deserved it. A document meant to give them control. Instead, it became the thing that destroyed their case. But to understand how that happened, you need to understand why my parents were so certain I would fail. My mother kept a notebook in the kitchen. It wasn't a planner. It wasn't a recipe book. It was a ledger. Every time she paid for something she believed I owed her for, she wrote it down. School supplies, shoes, doctor visits, field trips, anything she could attach a number to. When I was 14, I accidentally saw a page while looking for a phone charger. There was my name at the top. Underneath it were years of expenses. I remember staring at those numbers and feeling something inside me go cold. I had thought my parents were simply careful with money. I didn't understand that my mother believed every dollar spent on me created an obligation. Whenever she wanted something from me, she'd say the same thing. "After everything we've done for you." My father didn't keep a written ledger. He just expected obedience. If he helped me, I was supposed to remember it. If he gave advice, I was supposed to follow it. If he offered money, it came with conditions. By 19, I had a job at a local diner. I wasn't making much, but I was working and saving what I could. For the first time, I believed I might actually build a life that belonged to me. Then my father's business started falling apart. One evening, he pushed a folder across the kitchen table. Inside was paperwork for a $40,000 business loan. He wanted me to co-sign it. "Why me?" I asked. He said I had good credit and no major debts. That was true. What he didn't mention was that if his business failed, the debt could follow me for years. I told him I couldn't do it. My mother immediately called me selfish. My father said I didn't understand how families worked. "I understand exactly what you're asking," I said. "You want me to risk my future to save your business." My father stood up. "If you won't help your family, you don't belong in this house." I thought he was angry. I didn't think he meant it. He did. My mother brought me 2 duffel bags. I packed clothes, a few books, my phone charger, and whatever else I could carry. Then I walked outside. My father followed me to the porch. "You'll be begging on the street." I looked at him. I wanted to say something that would hurt him. Instead, I said, "Okay." Then I got into my 1998 Corolla and drove away. For the next 11 nights, my car was my bedroom. I parked wherever I thought I could stay unnoticed. I reclined the driver's seat and used my jacket as a pillow. Every morning, I changed clothes in the car and went to work. I didn't miss a single diner shift. Not one. I was exhausted and embarrassed. There were moments when I wanted to call my mother and apologize just to have somewhere to sleep. But every time I reached for my phone, I remembered the folder on the kitchen table. $40,000. My future. Their business. And my father's prediction. "You'll be begging on the street." On the 12th morning, I received a call from a bank. There was an account in my grandmother Rosemary's name. She had died the year before. I knew she had left me something, but I assumed it was probably a few keepsakes. The woman on the phone told me there was a payable on death account. The balance was $26,500. My grandmother had named me as the sole beneficiary. I kept checking the balance because I was afraid it would somehow disappear. To someone else, $26,500 might not have seemed like much. To me, it felt enormous. But my grandmother had never taught me that money was the answer to everything. Money was a tool. What mattered was what you built with it. So I made myself a rule. I wasn't going to use that money to make my life comfortable. I was going to use it to make my life independent. I bought a used food truck. It wasn't pretty. The paint was faded. One cabinet door didn't close properly, and the refrigeration system made strange noises. I bought it anyway, because I realized something my parents didn't. I could start small. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their money. I just needed one customer. Then another. Then another. My grandmother had also left me her recipes. They were handwritten on old index cards, stained around the edges from years of cooking. There was a chicken dish my mother had never managed to reproduce correctly, a tomato sauce my grandmother made every Sunday, and one recipe that became the foundation of everything. I called it Rosemary's Sunday Chicken. The first weekend I sold it from the truck. I made enough to cover the day's expenses. The second weekend, I sold out. By the third, people were waiting before I opened. I remember standing inside that cramped truck, looking at the line outside, and realizing something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. For nearly a year, I worked almost every hour I could. Food truck during the day, prep work at night, accounting after midnight. I learned food costs, payroll, permits, inventory, and customer service. Then a small diner became available. The owner was retiring. The kitchen needed work. The dining room needed paint. The books were messy enough that my accountant told me I should probably walk away. I didn't. I saw what it could become. I put almost everything I had left into that first restaurant. On opening morning, I stood alone in the dining room before the first customer arrived. For a moment, I thought about my parents. 19-year-old Athena, sleeping in a Corolla. Now Athena was standing inside a restaurant she owned. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I unlocked the door. The first customer walked in at 7:04 a.m. She ordered breakfast, then dessert. Then she came back the next day with her husband. That was how it started. Not with investors. Not with my parents' help. With one customer who liked the food enough to return. I named the restaurant Rosemary's Table. I wanted my grandmother's name above the door. Because everything I had came from something she had given me. The recipes. The money. And most importantly, the belief that I could build something without becoming cruel to people along the way. The first restaurant became profitable. Then crowded. Then people started asking about another location. So I opened the second. Then the third. The fourth took longer. By the sixth, I had a management team. By the 10th, I had employees who had been with me for years. Eventually, there were 14 Rosemary's Table restaurants and approximately 340 employees. Every location had the same recipe cards somewhere in the kitchen. My grandmother's handwriting. Her measurements. Her little notes. Don't rush the sauce. Taste before serving. Feed people like their family. That last one became the unofficial rule of the company. I never imagined those words would eventually matter in a legal battle. By 34, I had stopped thinking about the sentence my father had spoken. At least, I thought I had. My parents weren't part of my life anymore. Years passed. The restaurants grew. My husband and I built our own life. I started donating meals to local shelters. We hired young people who needed a second chance. Whenever I saw a 19-year-old employee struggling, I remembered myself. I never told them the whole story. My past didn't need to become their burden. Then a regional business magazine published a profile about Rosemary's Table. The headline mentioned 14 locations. There was a photograph of me standing inside the original restaurant. For the first time in 15 years, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. When I did, there was no greeting. No apology. No question about how I was doing. I saw the article, she said. I waited. Then she said, "We need to talk about your success." I asked what she wanted. She didn't hesitate. She wanted 30%. Of everything. At first, I thought she was joking. She told me my parents had sacrificed for me. She mentioned the house, food, clothes, and years they had supposedly supported me. It was the same ledger. Only now the number wasn't written in a notebook. It was 30% of 14 restaurants. I said no. She became angry. Then she threatened that I would regret refusing. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from an attorney. My parents were suing me. Attached to the lawsuit was a document I had never seen before. It supposedly came from my grandmother. It was dated 2009. According to my parents, it gave them a legal claim to 30% of what I had built. I stared at the document. Then I noticed the signature. My grandmother's name was written at the bottom. I knew immediately that something was wrong. I had seen her real signature hundreds of times. That wasn't it. My attorney told me not to accuse anyone. Let's find out what we can prove. So we started digging. The lawsuit claimed my grandmother had signed the document in 2009. There was one obvious problem. In 2009, there was no Rosemary's Table. There wasn't even a food truck. There was only me, my grandmother, and the recipes that eventually became the foundation of everything. Then I remembered something. The envelope my grandmother had given me years earlier. I'd kept it in a safe. Inside was a letter. I read it slowly. My grandmother explained that my mother had previously asked her to sign papers connected to family property and finances. She had refused. Then she wrote something that made my hands go cold. If I ever saw a document claiming she had signed away part of what she had left me, I should not trust it. She had never signed such a document. My grandmother had written that warning years before the lawsuit. But a letter wasn't enough. We needed evidence outside the family. So my attorney began collecting records. Bank documents, estate paperwork, old correspondence, cards, anything containing my grandmother's genuine signature. Then another detail surfaced. The disputed document listed witnesses. We checked their names. One was a man my grandmother had known through church. The problem? He had died before the date written on the document. Not after. Before. My attorney put the record on the table. Neither of us spoke. The timeline itself was becoming impossible. But my parents still had the signature. So we sent the document to a forensic document examiner. The examiner compared it with authentic signatures from years earlier. Stroke patterns, letter formation, pressure, spacing, pen movement. The report concluded that the disputed signature showed extraordinary correspondence with a genuine older signature. Not merely the same name, the same distinctive characteristics. I read the report twice. I wasn't celebrating. My grandmother had been dead for years. My mother was my mother. And now her signature had become evidence. I thought about the ledger. My parents had always believed everything could be measured. Money, sacrifice, obligation. Now they had reduced my grandmother's wishes to a document with a percentage attached to it. 30%. The lawsuit moved forward. My attorney warned me not to expect a dramatic courtroom scene. Most of the important work happened before anyone reached a courtroom. The records, the filings, the examination, the depositions. When my mother's deposition day arrived, she looked confident. She seemed almost relieved to see me, as if she still believed I was the 19-year-old standing on the porch with 2 duffel bags. She said she was only trying to get what belonged to our family. I didn't answer. My attorney asked her about the document. She confirmed she believed it was genuine. Then he placed an authentic document in front of her. My grandmother's genuine signature. Then the disputed document. Side by side. My mother stared at them. My attorney asked her to explain the differences. She couldn't. Then he asked about the supposed witness. The man who had died before the date on the document. Her confidence changed. There was no shouting. No confession. Just a long pause. Then she said she didn't know. For the first time, I saw uncertainty on my mother's face. The more questions my attorney asked, the weaker their story became. The estate records didn't support their claim. The timeline didn't support it. The witness list didn't support it. And now the signature itself had become a serious problem. My mother had spent my childhood keeping a ledger, because she believed every number had to balance. Now she was sitting in a deposition, while the numbers of her own story stopped adding up. The lawsuit had started with my parents believing they were finally going to collect a debt. But they had misunderstood something fundamental. I didn't owe them my success. And my grandmother had never given them permission to claim it. My attorney filed the evidence. The forensic examination. The historical documents. The records showing the timeline problem. My grandmother's letter. Everything was organized. Everything had a source. I didn't want anyone to believe me simply because I was the daughter telling the story. I wanted the evidence to speak for itself. Then came the court's decision. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. My parents' claim was over. They were ordered to pay my legal fees. I read the order twice. Then I put it down. After months of stress and sleepless nights, the ending was a few pages of legal language. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. Just a decision. The claim was finished. There was something else I could have done. The evidence raised serious questions about whether my mother had participated in creating a false document. My attorney explained my options. I told him I didn't want to pursue criminal prosecution. Not because I trusted my mother. I didn't. Not because what happened was acceptable. It wasn't. I simply didn't want to spend another year of my life trying to punish someone who had already spent 15 years proving she couldn't be the parent I needed. I wanted the lawsuit finished. I wanted my business protected. I wanted my life back. That was enough. Winning didn't require me to become like them. I didn't need another ledger. My father reacted differently. After the case collapsed, he withdrew as a plaintiff. Then he contacted me. I almost ignored the message. Instead, I agreed to meet him at a small coffee shop. He looked older than I remembered. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then he said, "I was wrong." I didn't answer. "I thought you would come back." I asked why. He said because he believed I needed them. 15 years earlier, that belief had been the reason he put me out. He thought dependence was permanent. He thought because I was 19, I would always be 19 in his mind. Someone who needed permission. Someone who needed money. Someone who needed a place to sleep. Then he looked at me. "You never did." I knew what he meant. He wasn't talking about the restaurants. He wasn't talking about the money. He was talking about his prediction. He had told me I would beg. I hadn't. I had worked. I had struggled. I had failed sometimes. I had started again. And somehow, step by step, I had built a life. I could have told him about the 11 nights in my car. The mornings when I was terrified. The times I almost called home. But I didn't. Instead, I told him something I had never been able to say at 19. "I didn't need you to believe in me." He looked at me. "I needed you not to make me believe I couldn't do it." He didn't have an answer. And for once, I didn't need one. A few weeks later, I stood inside the 14th Rosemary's table. The lunch crowd was starting. Employees moved between tables. Orders came through the kitchen. The smell of my grandmother's recipes filled the room. I looked at her framed photograph near the entrance. I wondered what she would have thought of everything. Then I noticed one of our youngest employees standing near the kitchen. She was 19. It was her first week. She looked nervous. She apologized because she'd made a mistake on an order. I told her it was okay. She said she was afraid she'd get fired. I smiled. "You're learning." Then she asked why I was so patient with new employees. I looked around the restaurant. At the tables. At the kitchen. At the people working together. For a second, I was 19 again. Standing beside my Corolla. Holding 2 duffel bags. Listening to my father tell me I would be begging on the street. I looked at the young woman in front of me and remembered the lesson my grandmother had taught me. If you have enough, make sure the next person doesn't have to go hungry. So I told her, because somebody gave me a chance once. Then I went back into the kitchen. Not because I had forgotten what happened. Because I finally understood that my parents' worst prediction had never defined me. They gave me a sentence. My grandmother gave me a foundation. And I built the rest. 14 restaurants. Hundreds of employees. One life that belonged completely to me. And I never had to beg for any of it.